Welcome to the first mailbag of Season 7, DM Gives Inspiration. These questions are submitted via the contact link at kylefergusson.com or by joining the Discord, which you can find a link for on that website as well. The first question comes from Dead Center, who asks, how do you handle inter-party deception? I have a paladin who wants to multi-class in Warlock. His newfound patron asked him to kill an innkeeper in the town who has been helping the party. He did so, with the help of another party member, but the other four have no idea. How would you handle them having the conversation about the murder? Having the paladin make deception rolls would be a little too obvious, but if someone wants to make an insight check, I would for sure let that happen. Do you just go hands off and let it play out? First of all, you have a brilliant scenario going on. I love that you seduced the paladin into Warlock Dark Side. And apparently another party member's down with it. But this is not an uncommon problem. So let's imagine first that we're just talking about your initial question, how to handle inter-party deception. It's really helpful to have a house rule that players cannot roll deception on each other. They are embodying their characters, pretending to be their characters, so why would the dice tell them how to feel, how to perceive the world? So along with this deception rule, we would also include insight, intimidation, and persuasion. This can seem intense, a little heavy-handed at first, but you're actually making things easier for all of your players. As you mentioned earlier, once dice start rolling, people know something's up. Rolling a 3 on insight does not make a player calmer about their current situation. They become more paranoid. And the player making the defensive deception is already called out, even if they had nothing to hide. And by banning out this type of player-on-player interaction, a sort of PvP, you actually elevate all types of players. The actor types get to act. They get to perform. They get to use that poker face that they themselves possess and is a trait of their character. And the non-actor types don't embroil themselves in situations they can't roleplay out of. A couple of lucky persuasion or deception rolls could lead your shyest player to be the leader of the party for this scenario. Before you know it, they're in over their head. They're not having fun. And it can be pretty awkward for the table. I also find that the players who do like lying to the party, intimidating the party, would be doing that anyway. So what do they need the rolls for? You might also want to include Sleight of Hand in this list. But for the most part, those are rogues having some innocent fun. And as long as they're not slowing down the game or overcomplicating the party, I say let them get away with being a little roguey from time to time. The other big problem with skill-based PvP is that players do a lot of combat. In their interactions with NPCs, they are inches away from throwing fists and swords. So these in-game confrontations often end up in combat. But because people aren't trying to kill each other, they're trying to interrogate. It gets really ugly really fast. You've probably got a player who would tie someone up, throw the first punch. And at that point, we're full-blown taking away the player's agency. We're not only telling them how to feel, what they're doing, but we're essentially torturing them? And even with a table of professional actors, in-game fights turn to in-game emotions, which become real emotions, which become real-life fights. So returning to your scenario where you haven't put these rules in place, what kind of story do you want to tell with this? What is the characters and the patron's preferred outcome? If this patron is just enjoying deceiving a paladin, throwing him under the bus, he's already succeeded by putting him in this situation. We might as well let all the players know what's going on here. Turn what could be a fight into a conversation, into a strategy meeting. Or if you do want to deceive the party, take the deception puzzle and place it on an NPC. Maybe the patron impersonates the innkeeper. Players aren't rolling random insights against a fellow player. They're seeing why the innkeeper is acting differently. Maybe the patron's too busy for that sort of thing, so they put a servant in the place of the innkeeper. What does the patron want? Do they want to use this inn as a new cult hangout? Do they want to get rid of the innkeeper for a certain reason? Or are they just an agent of chaos, in which case they would have no problem getting that paladin in trouble? Take all that energy that players would fire at each other and give them a target for it. Let's say a rogue steals from the party, and the players go to confront him. That's what we call an improv, a grenade. There is a dangerous situation that someone has to jump on for the good of the party. If you go hands off in that situation, it's up to the players to come up with their own solution, to jump on that grenade. Either the rogue gives up to move things along, betraying their own character, or the party is locked in accusation until one of the other players gives up, talks everybody down. Can we as DM work as a mediator, supply a quest or an NPC that would dissolve the tension here? If the item is of great importance, suggest to the rogue that we go to the pawn shop, that we find the fencer. Or what if you offered a quest the rogue could give to the party? How about we do a job that really gets us rich? And they have one in mind. With your help, of course. Or if they want to escalate it to the town guard, maybe the rogue knows that the guard is run by the Thieves Guild, that they're going to get out scot-free. Now everybody's happy, and the deception gets to continue. And we found something active for everyone in this party to enjoy, without devolving into argument. Dead center includes a small secondary question. What is your preferred time length for sessions? Personally, I like 4 hours. I would say 3 hours, but I know that goofing around, hanging out, and getting some food is going to occupy at least an hour of the time. Plus you have player wind-up, remembering where we were, getting into character. Occasionally there's player requests to go longer if we're really in a big moment, or I might schedule a climax of sorts, where we're going to see this content to the end today, and those can go about 6 or 7 hours. And of course there's outliers. I've done 1-hour sessions with single players just to catch them up. I've done 2-hour sessions with a group that easily falls into their characters. And I've done an 11-hour session during a hurricane when the power was out. So we didn't have anywhere to go anyway. So why not just keep enjoying the content? But I find my DM brain, and this is true the older I get, starts to burn out around 4 hours. Wake asks, do you have any tricks for doing group skill checks? Some checks, like finding a trapdoor, require only one success. Large parties can almost never fail these just by brute force. You're not wrong. And rules as written, you're doing it correctly. On page 175 of the player's handbook it says, to make a group ability check, everyone in the group makes the ability check. If at least half the group succeeds, the whole group succeeds. Otherwise, the group fails. But as we talked about in Season 6, Episode 2, we know this isn't true when it comes to stealth and surprise. This majority wins works best in situations where you're exploring, where these skilled players, the successful players, could keep the other players out of the hazards. So what are we really trying to accomplish by having a hidden trapdoor? Do we want to give away a single small dopamine hit to that player who rolls high enough? Or should there be something more at work? Maybe the real trap isn't about finding it, it's about solving the puzzle once found. The disguise, the hidden part of the trap, is just really flavoring. We know they're going to find it. If they don't, well, that just adds to the danger. Reinforces that they should keep looking for traps in future rooms. If anything, work under the assumption that they're going to find the trap in the first place. Skip the group skill check altogether if you want, and focus on the real puzzle. When Indiana Jones walks into the room with the golden idol, the arrow traps on the wall, triggered by the eyes on the floor, are not a danger to him when he's not under stress. But once that temple starts collapsing, once an enemy, the boulder, shows up, that's when things get dangerous. Now, if you do find your players really love doing group skill checks, you can restrict it if you choose. Have everyone pick a leader who makes that roll, and everyone else offers their assistance through that advantage, if trained in the skill that they're using. But that can feel like an artificial restriction, and players will easily catch on to that in a big group. No matter how you choose to handle traps and discovering them, they should be phased out eventually, much like our conversations in much earlier episodes about travel and camping. Eventually, the players possess so many spells, so many abilities, that most traps won't pose a threat. The traps that do still pose a threat are outrageous things like spheres of annihilation, black holes that appear in rooms as part of the wall and suck everything into it. At that point, is there really any use in hiding the trap? It should just be obvious and perhaps a part of combat, another obstacle tied to another puzzle. Wake has a secondary question. Do you have a process for handling insight checks into NPCs? Do you say a bad check is just hard to read? Or can an exceptionally bad one give wrong information? All of this would be so much easier if the players couldn't see the roll they made. It is impossible to not metagame to some degree your own rolls as a player. You roll a 4, the DM says you don't notice anything. Big surprise, you're probably going to keep on the same path. The best way to handle that is to escalate things on the NPC's side. If a player makes a bad insight check, they're basically going, making a face at the NPC they're critical of. Their sentence, their question, might be delivered in an offensive way, causing the magistrate to dismiss the party, or even have them arrested on the spot for making such accusations. A bad insight check is not a free pass. It is not a casual perception around the room and nothing bad happens. With those middle-of-the-road checks, you can have a lot more fun, such as coming up with something that may not be true, but the players may infer that they have had a success. In the low success areas, like those 10s to 15s, that's where you can really start being twisted, if the NPC is actually being villainous or lying. You can say things like, you feel confident in your decision. Or you can introduce random information that the players will glob onto, such as the NPC looks quickly at the clock tower. Did that mean anything? Were they checking the time? Or is the item they're looking for, and therefore the NPC might be lying about, hidden inside the clock tower? With the high rolls, where the players are darn sure of their own success, remind them of the stakes. You know this NPC is lying, but you can't make a scene here. You could be arrested still by accusing the magistrate. The town guard could get involved if you start shouting accusations in the middle of a marketplace. If it's an absolute failure, everyone is 100% sure that that 1 or 2 on the insight just isn't going to be useful, that's when you can give them something useless, something funny even, just a bit of entertaining fluff. It is an insight check after all. They're analyzing their opponent in this conversation. Maybe they notice that their socks are different colors, or their tunic isn't buttoned up right. Even that could give a little moment, still acknowledge the player's skills of perception and insight. And maybe they could even transform that failure into a moment to call out the NPC, put them off balance in the conversation, and perhaps get advantage in another check done by another player coming up. And if they do succeed, they get that natural 20. Try adding another layer to it. Before the players leave the conversation, make them perform a deception check to not give it away by a small smile, by their own excitement that they've solved the puzzle or found the murderer. Mike submits the final question of this episode. Is it a thing where a good dungeon master can go pro? Players would pay the DM to host the game and be expected to have the experience for an engaging session. The reason I ask is I've never played. I don't have friends who would be inclined to play, and I would like to learn. This is a thing, but only recently has it become a full-blown profession that someone can do full-time thanks to the internet. Originally, years and years ago, you would basically buy a ticket at a convention to sit down at a table and enjoy a up to 4-hour session. As hobby shops, card shops, board game shops grew and became more of cafe diners, they would often have a local DM, not so different than finding a babysitter or someone to watch your pet while you're out of town, that you could call up and would arrive at the shop to DM your evening. Now that practice has moved online. If you Google hire a dungeon master, you can find a lot of different websites looking to hook you up with basically a personal trainer, a dungeon master for your evening. A starting out dungeon master on these websites can make about $10 a player, with about 4 to 5 players per game lasting 4 hours. When you factor in the hours and the players, most consistent DMs on these types of websites charge about $25 an hour. You basically choose the DM for the type of game you want, or DMs may host multiple nights a week with different themes in each slot. It's not all that different than escape rooms. These do not get spruced up or changed much week to week. You are going to experience the same adventure that the group before you did and the group before that did. But that also means it's heavily rehearsed, that it should be quite refined, and the assets are likely good quality. The miniatures match the characters, the assets on Roll20 provide a good theme for your evening. The top DMs in this sort of profession make about $500 a session. and are often booked well in advance, much like you might want a good magician for your kid's birthday party. The internet's a wild place. Things like Fiverr and Etsy allow lots of different crafts to be sold, and it's no different with Dungeons & Dragons. And that concludes the first mailbag of Season 7. Thank you all for your questions, however you may have gotten them to me. There were a lot of questions I didn't get to today. Look forward to future episodes. As mentioned in previous mailbag episodes, there is some inspiration over at kylefergusson.com. This time, a full-blown one-shot adventure that lasts 3 to 4 hours, with a Christmas theme, if you will. If you're not familiar with There Will Be Dungeons, it's a rather wacky live play show I do over on the Frog Pants Network. Often I take the role of Varel, the barbarian lizardman, but on episode 129, I DM'd a small campaign set in that universe. And while it is very particular to the There Will Be Dungeons style, take a look at it as an example of skinning. This is where you take an existing monster and basically give them a different disguise, a different look, to set the current theme. Such as in this adventure, I used the Yeti, the 3 challenge rating monster, as Frosty the Snowman, Snow Miser, and the Bumble, allowing the players to make a Gozerian-like choice as to who they would fight, even though on the DM side, they were basically going to fight the same thing, making it a lot easier for me to run. You can find that full one-shot adventure PDF over at kylefergusson.com, and you can listen to the full recording of the session over at frogpants.com under There Will Be Dungeons, episode 129, Spider Claws. And thank you for listening to this show. Be sure to subscribe, share the show however you can, it all helps out immensely. Music was by Brian Griffith, and I will see you all next week with a new episode of DM Gives Inspiration.